The girl in the torn white dress came running out of the heat like someone was chasing her from the far end of the world. She stumbled across the dry grass, fell to her knees, then crawled the last few feet until she reached Luke Halston. And before the old rancher even understood what he was seeing, she grabbed his shirt with both hands and gasped like she had been drowning for hours. Luke had seen storms, rattlesnakes, and men drunk enough to fight their own shadows, but nothing prepared him for the sight of a terrified young woman collapsing in front of his barn with her wedding veil dragging behind her like a ghost tail. Her voice cracked. "Please, please help me. They are coming." Luke dropped the saddle he was working on. The girl was shaking so hard that dust slid off her shoulders with every breath. Her dress was torn near the hem, her hair a mess of twigs and sweat, and her eyes were wide like a deer that had run too far and too fast. He crouched beside her. "Easy now. Tell me what happened." But she only shook her head and grabbed him again, harder this time, almost desperate. "I could not do it. I could not marry that man. I ran. I had to run." Luke looked across the open prairie. A faint cloud of dust rode along the horizon. Maybe riders, maybe trouble. Maybe the reason she was trembling like a leaf in winter. He lifted her chin gently. "You hurt? You scared? You need to breathe or you will pass out right here in the dirt." She pressed her forehead to his chest, not in passion, but in sheer terror, like he was the only solid thing left in a world that had already tried to swallow her whole. Luke felt something old and heavy in his chest, a feeling he had buried years ago when the doctor told him his wife would not make it through the fever, a feeling he thought he had lost forever. She whispered again, "You are the only person who ever showed me kindness. I did not know where else to go." Luke looked at her small, shaking hands wrapped around his shirt. He looked at the dust cloud that was getting larger every minute. He looked at the wide, empty prairie that had always been his quiet home. And for the first time in 10 years, he felt something dangerous, responsibility, and maybe something even more dangerous, hope. He lifted her gently to her feet. "Stay behind me. Whatever's coming, it will face me first." The girl swallowed hard and looked up at him with eyes full of trust he did not think he deserved. And that was the moment Luke Halston realized something simple. Once those riders arrived, nothing in his life would ever be the same again. But he still did not know the truth. He still did not know the real reason she had run through the fields in her wedding dress. What kind of desperate secret drives a young bride to flee her own wedding and throw herself at the feet of a lonely rancher? Luke felt the girl squeeze the back of his shirt as the dust cloud on the horizon kept growing. He had no idea how many riders were coming, but he knew one thing for sure. Whoever they were not riding this hard just to bring her flowers. The girl tried to stand steady, but her knees buckled again. Luke caught her elbow before she hit the ground. "Easy now. You breathe slow or you will drop again." She nodded, but her breath still came fast. The kind of fast that only shows up when fear has already crawled into a person's bones. The air felt hotter than it should have. The prairie was quiet in that strange way that happens before trouble arrives. Luke had lived out here long enough to know that silence this sharp was never a good sign. She brushed her hair out of her face. Her hands were trembling. "They will blame you. They will say you helped me run. You should not be near me." Luke snorted softly, almost like he could not believe what he was hearing. "Darling, people blame me even when I'm home alone fixing fences. I think I will live." His tone was calm, but underneath it was a weight she could feel. A man who had already lost everything once is not scared of a few loud voices. She looked at him, confused and scared, and maybe something else too. Respect, trust, hope that he might be the one person in this whole dusty place who would not throw her to the wolves. Luke rested his hand on her back just long enough to steady her breath. "You said you ran. Tell me why. Tell me before those riders get here." The girl swallowed, hard enough to make Luke see her throat shake. "My father signed a deal. He owes money. I am the payment. I was supposed to marry a man almost old enough to be his father. He said it would fix everything." She wiped her cheek with the side of her wrist. "I could not breathe. I could not walk into that church. So I ran." Then she whispered, almost afraid of her own words. Shh. I need to make love, not the kind they forced on me, the kind that lets me breathe. Luke felt anger rise in him, slow and hot, like coal waking back up. He had seen hard times, seen men make ugly choices, but selling off your own daughter as a debt payment cut deeper than any story he had heard in years. The riders were closer now. He could hear faint metal clinking, and he knew what that meant. They were armed, and they were serious. He stepped slightly in front of her without even thinking. You stay behind me. No matter what happens, do not run again. She looked at him with eyes full of fear and something almost like belief. Why would you stand in front of me? Why would you risk this for someone you barely know? Luke did not answer yet, because how could he explain the feeling in his chest when she collapsed at his feet? How could he explain why he could not let her face this alone? And the real question was still coming. What would Luke do when those riders finally reached the ranch and demanded he hand her over? The riders reached the edge of Luke Halston's property faster than either of them expected. The sound of hooves rolled across the dry ground, heavy and steady, like trouble arriving right on schedule. Dust billowed behind the men as they slowed to a stop near the corral gate, and Luke felt the girl behind him grip the back of his shirt again. There were 5 of them. Hard-faced men, dressed neat enough to smell like town, not ranch, the kind of men who believed money could buy anything, including a frightened young woman in a wedding dress. One of them tipped his hat. Afternoon, Luke. We are looking for a runaway bride. We figured she might have passed this way. Mind if we have a look around? Luke stood still, steady as a fence post hammered deep into the ground. His voice stayed calm, but there was a weight in it that made the riders pause. No one passes through my land without my say-so. You boys know that. The tallest rider smiled, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. Her father says she's confused. Says she ran off before the vows. We are here to bring her back. Nice and gentle. Luke took one slow step forward. And what happens after you bring her back? What kind of gentle are we talking about? The tall man shrugged. Depends on how much fuss she keeps making. Behind Luke, the girl pressed both hands over her mouth to keep from making a sound. He could feel her shaking like she was standing barefoot in snow. Luke's jaw tightened. You boys know I keep to myself. I do not get in other folks' business. But a girl running scared in a wedding dress is not regular business. The men exchanged looks. The tall one leaned forward in his saddle. Luke, do not make this hard. We do not want trouble. Luke looked him straight in the eye. Trouble is already here. Silence spread across the ranch like a slow shadow. A hawk circled overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a dry fence creaked in the wind. The tall man finally spoke. Step aside and hand her over. This is not your fight. Luke's voice dropped to a level that made even the horses shift uneasily. Maybe not, but she came to me, and until she says otherwise, she stays right where she is. The girl behind him let out a tiny breath, the kind people only release when they realize someone is truly standing between them and danger. The tall rider sat back in his saddle. Last chance. Luke, hand her over and we ride out quiet. Refuse and things get loud. Luke lifted his chin, eyes steady, shoulders set like he had roots deeper than any tree on that land. Boys, you can ride out quiet right now, or you can push your luck. But either way, you are not taking her. The riders stared at him, weighing their choices, and the whole prairie seemed to hold its breath. If you're still listening, this story has a long road ahead, so make sure to hit that subscribe button before the trail gets rough. Grab a warm cup of tea, settle in, and tell me what time it is where you're listening from today. The riders did not move at first. They just sat there, shifting in their saddles, trying to figure out if Luke Halston had finally lost his mind, or if he truly meant every word falling out of his mouth. The sun rode high above them, bright enough to make the dust glow like smoke from a slow fire. It was the kind of heat that made tempers short and choices dangerous. The tall rider clicked his tongue. Luke, you are making a mistake. You stand aside right now and no one gets hurt. Her father wants her home in one piece. He says she's scared and confused, nothing more. Luke kept his eyes on the man, and not once did he blink. If she was only confused, she would not run across half this prairie with her dress torn and her heart pounding out of her chest. You can save that story for someone who does not know fear when he sees it. The tall man leaned forward. Luke, you are a good rancher, but you're not thinking straight. You want to throw away your own peace for a girl you hardly know. Luke let out a breath, slow and steady. Maybe I do not know her well yet, but I know what she ran from. And I know what she ran toward. That is enough for me. Behind him, the girl stepped closer, so her shoulder brushed his back, a small touch that said she was still terrified, but she trusted him more than anyone else in her life. Luke felt that touch like a spark running straight into the part of him he thought had gone cold years ago. The tall man finally nodded to his riders. Search the barn. Search the shed. If she's here, we take her. If he tries to stop us, we deal with him. Luke stepped forward and planted himself between the riders and the barn door like a man rooted in the earth. No one searches anything except their own conscience. This land is mine. My word is law here. You are not putting a single boot past this point. One of the younger riders scoffed. Luke, there are 5 of us. You cannot fight us all. Luke smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. You might be right, but I promise you this. If you want that girl, you are going to need more men and a better reason. The riders hesitated. One of the younger riders shifted uneasily in his saddle. He leaned toward the tall man and whispered, Boss, that is Luke Halston. You remember the Blackwell brothers? He took all 3 of them down by himself on the old Cheyenne road. I'm not dying on this ranch over somebody else's debt. Not today. Not because they feared Luke's fists, but because something in his voice told them he had already made peace with whatever would come next. The prairie grew quiet again, the kind of quiet that happens right before a choice is made, and this was the moment that would decide everything. And would those riders back down, or would they force a fight that would change all their lives? The tall rider finally lifted his hand, and the others pulled their reins tight. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the wind brushing through the dry grass, carrying that tense silence across every inch of Luke Halston's land. It felt like the whole prairie was waiting to see which way the story would turn. The tall man looked at Luke again, this time with something new in his eyes. Not anger, not pride, maybe something closer to doubt. Maybe even respect. He cleared his throat and said, quiet but clear, if she does not want to go, then we are done here. This is between her and her father now. Luke did not move. He just turned slightly so the girl could step forward if she wished. Her hands were still shaking, but her voice had changed. It was stronger, steadier, like someone who finally remembered she had the right to choose her own life. She looked at the riders and spoke, I am not confused. I am not property. I am not going back. The tall rider nodded once. Suit yourself. But your father will not like it. She breathed deep. That is his burden, not mine. The tall man glared at Luke for a long moment. You win today, Halston, but her father will not forget this, and neither will I. The riders turned their horses and rode off slow, leaving a long trail of dust drifting behind them. Luke watched until they became nothing but moving dots swallowed by the horizon. Only then did he look at the girl beside him. You did good. Her voice trembled again. Luke, you stood for me when no one else ever did. Why? He wiped sweat from his brow and gave a small, tired smile, because sometimes a person needs someone to stand beside them even when the world says they should not. Because running alone only goes so far. And because no one deserves to be treated like a debt. She looked down at her torn dress. So what do I do now? Where do I go? Luke took a slow breath, the kind you take when a decision has already been made in your heart long before your head catches up. You start fresh, right here if you want. And you hold your ground. If a storm comes, you face it with your chin up and your back straight. Life is not always kind, but you do not bow to it. She nodded, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. Not from fear this time, but from relief. From freedom. From the chance to choose her own tomorrow. Luke looked out across the open field. You know, sometimes strength is not in the fight. Sometimes it is in the choosing to walk away, choosing to stand still, choosing to be better than the hand you were dealt. Then he glanced her way, and choosing who you trust your life with. Now let me ask you something. What would you do if you had to pick between peace and doing what is right? If you enjoyed this story, give it a like to help it reach someone who might need a little courage today. And if you want more stories just like this one, go ahead and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Grab a warm cup of tea, settle in, and tell me where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now.